They made him wait 30 years. Not with cruelty, not with malice, but with the quiet institutional patience of a family that has always known how to defer a promise without technically breaking it. He smiled through every delay. He attended every engagement. He carried himself with a steadiness that the palace relied upon without ever fully rewarding. And then, in the final months of her life, the one person who had always seen him clearly sat down and made sure the waiting was over. What she signed in those final months was not just paperwork. It was a reckoning. And the institution that thought it could quietly reverse her decision has just been handed a legal document that it cannot argue with, cannot reframe, and cannot make disappear. Prince Edward has just done something no one inside the palace believed was possible. He forced the crown to put its defeat in writing. To understand how a man known for his restraint ended up delivering legal papers to Crown Estate offices on March 25, 2026, you have to go back much further than the lawyers. You have to go back to a 120-room Tudor Gothic mansion sitting on 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park, a building so neglected by 1996 that the Crown Estate had seriously considered turning it into a hotel. You have to go back to the youngest son who looked at that building, opened his own private accounts, and decided he would fix it himself. And you have to go back to a dying man who understood that without his signature on a specific document, everything his youngest son had built could be quietly dismantled the moment the institution decided it was convenient to do so. Prince Philip saw it coming. He always did. He had spent over 70 years watching the monarchy operate behind closed doors, watching how it moved against the people it no longer found useful, watching how institutional language could be weaponized to take back what had been publicly given. He was not going to let that happen to Edward. So as he was dying, he put his name on a letter of intent that tied Bagshot Park directly to the Edinburgh title. He did it knowing exactly what he was protecting against. He did it knowing that without it, the protection would not hold. What nobody inside the palace had fully calculated was that Edward had spent the years since reading those same patterns and building his defense accordingly. But before the lawyers arrived, before the documents were opened, before Charles was forced to confront what his mother had actually signed and what his father had witnessed, there was a jewelry audit. And that is where the personal became irreversible. Earlier in 2026, an official appeared at the Edinburgh household with a clipboard and a quiet instruction originating from the office of Queen Camilla. It was described as a routine heritage review. What it actually was an attempt to reclassify the anthem tiara. A piece commissioned by Queen Elizabeth II herself for Sophie's 1999 wedding, built from 4 antique elements shaped in a honeysuckle design taken from Queen Victoria's private collection, worn by Sophie at her wedding and at nearly every significant royal occasion for the 25 years since. The argument was precise and it was calculated. Because the tiara incorporated materials from the Victorian era, it could be classified as crown property rather than a private gift. Which would mean Sophie would no longer own it. She would need permission to wear it. There are moves that are about money, and there are moves that are about something else entirely. This was something else entirely. Sophie was never placed at the center of the royal jewelry hierarchy. That was understood inside the family, never stated directly, but always clear. The anthem tiara was her one piece. Her one crown. The thing Elizabeth had specifically commissioned for her, had legally categorized as a private wedding present in a signed deed of gift, had chosen as the tangible mark of her regard for the woman her youngest son had married. Take that away and you are not reorganizing a collection. You are sending a message about exactly where Sophie stands and exactly how much the previous queen's intentions matter to the current one. Edward understood the message immediately. His legal team responded with the deed of gift, signed by Elizabeth in 1999, which stated in unambiguous language that the tiara was a private wedding present. Not a state loan. Not a shared asset. Not a crown holding. Sophie's. That was Elizabeth's designation and it was documented and it was final. But Edward had gone further than the paperwork Elizabeth had signed. Years earlier he had commissioned a matching set of black and white pearl jewelry for Sophie, a necklace and earrings designed to sit precisely with the anthem tiara, funded through the crown but with the design rights held by Edward himself. His lawyers argued that the tiara and the pearl set formed a single artistic unit tied to Edward's design work. You cannot remove one without breaking the integrity of the other. It was a layer of protection built quietly and specifically for exactly the kind of pressure that had just arrived. And underneath all of the legal architecture sat something that could not be put in a filing cabinet. Sophie had called Elizabeth Mama in the middle of a formal Buckingham Palace reception in 2019. Not planned. Not managed. It slipped out in front of senior royals and guests while she was giving a speech, and she turned toward the Queen and it came out naturally, because that is how she saw her. The woman who signed that deed of gift was the woman she called her mother. And now someone was trying to use institutional language to take back what a mother had given. On the morning of March 25, 2026, Edward's legal team walked into Crown Estate offices carrying a file that had taken years to build. 3 pillars. The original 1998 lease showing the terms under which he took Bagshot Park, including the £5,000 per year agreement that came with a complete obligation to restore the property at his own expense. The records of what that restoration actually cost. £1.36 million of his own private money before he became a full-time working royal, with total restoration costs reaching nearly £3 million. And the letter of intent signed by Elizabeth in her final years and witnessed by Philip as he was dying, tying Bagshot Park to the Edinburgh title for Edward's lifetime. The contrast with his brother Andrew was sitting in the same public record. Andrew had lived at Royal Lodge for years without paying market rate. The National Audit Office had documented it. One brother had followed every rule, paid every invoice, met every obligation, and then watched the institution begin building pressure on the precise arrangement he had honored completely. The financial motive was not subtle. Bagshot Park was now worth approximately £30 million. If the Crown Estate recovered it, that asset could be sold or leased at enormous profit. Modernization is a more presentable word for that calculation, but the calculation is what it is. Charles had operated for years on a belief that felt, from his position, entirely reasonable. That as the king who had formally granted the Edinburgh title in April 2023, he retained a degree of authority over what accompanied it. His own legal team delivered their assessment in writing. He did not. What Elizabeth had given Edward was not a temporary arrangement subject to royal review. It was a legal inheritance constructed with care and documented with precision, and it was outside the reach of any subsequent royal decision. What Philip had witnessed in those final months meant the protection carried both of them. It was not one parent's sentiment. It was both parents' formal intention. That detail, when Charles read it, changed the texture of everything. He had known his mother favored the Edinburgh household. He had known where her loyalty sat through all the years of gentle management and quiet reinforcement. What he had not known was that Philip, in his final stage of life, had formally backed that protection in writing. Philip, who had spent 7 decades watching the institution maneuver. Philip, who understood better than anyone alive what it meant to be the one without the formal power. Philip, who had made one last careful decision to ensure his youngest son would not face what he had watched happen to others. By the afternoon, Princess Anne was in a private room inside Buckingham Palace, and there was no preamble. Anne and Sophie had not always been close. As recently as 2021, the distance between them was visible to anyone paying attention. Anne does not perform warmth she does not feel. Then Philip died in April of that year and the structure inside the family shifted. Anne and Sophie began moving through Elizabeth's final period in proximity, both supporting the Queen through her last year, both present in ways that quietly dissolved what had existed between them before. By September 2022 at the funeral, the change was visible. Sophie reached out and placed a hand on Anne's back as they stood waiting. A small gesture, unrehearsed, that showed exactly what had been built in the space of 18 months. Anne walked into that room carrying all of it. She told Charles that if he allowed private gifts from their mother to be challenged, reclassified, or recovered through institutional pressure, then the word of a monarch would mean nothing going forward. Not Elizabeth's word. Not his. Any monarch's. And then she said the thing that stopped the room completely. If our mother's signature on a lease or a deed of gift is not worth the paper it is written on today, then your signature will be worth even less tomorrow. It was not an emotional appeal. It was a structural argument. Royal authority does not originate with the current king. It flows from the entire history of the institution. Break the credibility of a predecessor's signed decisions and you weaken the foundation that makes your own authority mean anything at all. And had located the precise point at which Camilla's audit strategy would collapse the very system it claimed to be protecting. She had also seen the pattern before. She had watched what happened to Diana. The gradual removal of formal protections, the withdrawal of institutional support, the use of procedural language to accomplish what could never be said plainly. She had watched a woman give everything to the monarchy and then be isolated by it. She was not going to watch it happen again to someone who had spent years earning exactly the standing that was now being quietly eroded. She told Charles that if the pressure on the Edinburgh household did not stop, she would conduct a full public audit of Queen Camilla's household. Expenses, staffing, every allocation. And is the one member of the family whose record of financial discipline made that threat completely credible. If she says she will expose something, the institution believes her. And she had already reviewed Edward's documents herself. Every payment, every signed agreement, every record of maintenance that had saved the Crown Estate money for decades. She knew the numbers. She knew the terms. The core position was simple. Edward paid for that home. The Crown Estate accepted his money under binding terms. There is nothing left to negotiate. Late on March 25, 2026, a formal note was sent from the office of the Master of the Jewel House to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. The anthem tiara would remain under her exclusive private control. At the same time, the review of Bagshot Park was quietly closed. The official language described it as recognition of the Edinburgh household's contribution to maintaining the estate. Inside the palace, no one needed that translated. The crown had stepped back. Every inheritance, the title, the home, the tiara, stood exactly where Elizabeth had placed it. And the institution had been required to confirm that in writing, which means it now exists in the archive. Long after everyone involved is gone, when those documents are read, the record will be unambiguous. A claim was made. It was built on institutional pressure and financial motive and the assumption that a quiet man would stay quiet. It failed. And the failure is documented. What is not documented, and what cannot be filed away, is what has happened between two brothers. Charles has his monarchy. He has the structure and the authority and the institution organized around him. But something that was present before March 25, 2026 is no longer present now. The brother who stood back for 30 years, who paid his own way, who restored a building no one else wanted and maintained it faithfully and asked for nothing except to keep what was given to him, that brother no longer operates on trust. He operates on documentation. That shift is not visible at public engagements. The appearances will continue. The unity will be performed with the practiced precision the family has always managed. But inside the family, everyone knows what actually happened. One brother had to use the law to protect himself from the other. That does not heal. It becomes the new foundation on which everything else is built. And in a house in Surrey that the institution cannot legally touch, two people who waited 30 years for what they were given are living inside the proof that Elizabeth knew exactly what she was doing when she signed her name. She knew what was coming. She built the protection in advance. She asked Philip to witness it because she understood that the institution would eventually test it, and she wanted the answer to be impossible to argue with. She was right. And now so is the youngest son who finally, after everything, stopped waiting and made them say so in writing.